Hi there, my name is Shahab Mousavi. I am from Iran, and I grew up between Iran and Canada. I'm currently in Stanford, California, and I'm pursuing my PhD in management science and engineering here. I'd say I owe everything naturally to both my parents and the people along the way who have taught me the things that I needed to know to get to where I am and guided me and been generous with their time and attention and effort to get me to kind of guide me in that right direction. I'd say I started off obviously not knowing anything about AI, going towards civil engineering. My dad teaches civil engineering, so I felt like, okay, this is the best thing in the world naturally, and pursued it. Over time, I learned that if I want to have more of a real influence, whether it be in that field or any other field, I'm going to need more of a computational edge. And that got me to pursue a dual degree in computer engineering alongside civil engineering. Obviously, that was a troubling time, and I always joke that the pressure of that time period kind of contributed to my hair loss. But beyond that, I kind of learned gradually during that computer engineering journey that okay, these computers can not only be coded by me, but can learn for themselves and then also teach others. And that kind of got me direct in that direction. I guess another influence that I had along the way was the lucky opportunity I had to first be admitted to Stanford to come here and do my master's in computer science and the AI track, but also to be trusted by Kian Kadam-Farouche, who's a great friend of mine. He teaches deep learning, the CS230 course at Stanford alongside Andrew at Stanford, and also curated it with him as part of the deep learning AI course. And I had the good fortune of being able to teach that course multiple quarters alongside them by leading the teaching team there and the TAs. And that kind of got me on the track that I ended up pursuing up till now. Beyond that, I really didn't think I'd do a PhD when I originally came to Stanford. I had come here to do my master's and pursue entrepreneurship. I learned that there's the opportunity to do research that can have greater impact than purely academic research, and to pursue it in the context of startups and having more of an industrial connection as well. And so I once again got lucky by being trusted by my PhD advisor to pursue the PhD. For sure. So I could start off by explaining my work with MicroOne. I have a twofold relationship with MicroOne. On one hand, I collaborate with the research arm of MicroOne, where we work on advancing LLM as a judge approaches, and also generally looking at how we can better train models for them to not only interact with humans, but evaluate them, give them feedback, and help them on their journey. I also am part of the training team, where I work to improve the AI models as they are right now. MicroOne has a collaboration with some of the best AI labs that there are in the world, and through that we work on improving the frontier AI models and making sure that there's more of a contribution from all sorts of backgrounds to those models and the way they see the world. I personally believe that is a great opportunity for me to have more of an influence, bringing my research to the fore and providing it not only in the context of academic journals and publications, which I of course enjoy doing, but also being able to make it a bit more accessible to people who aren't necessarily deep in the weeds when it comes to these domains. And my research, going back to what I do outside of MicroOne, is more focused on applications of AI, because I essentially thought about, okay, do I want to pursue my research in core AI work or more applied AI? And I ended up deciding that I'm more interested on the applied side and being able to make sure that it has a real world impact in the domains that I find to be interesting. And that's how I ended up in the PhD. And going back to my good fortune with it, my advisor does not do AI work in general, and he's much more focused on the energy side of things and strategy that when it comes to AI policy and energy policy, not AI policy, sorry about that, when it comes to energy policy. And he thankfully took a bet on the idea that I could pursue my interests in pursuing. He kindly took a bet on the idea that I could bring my AI background to improving energy policy decision making, and I've been pursuing that research ever since. As part of that, I'm a member of the Stanford Energy Modeling Forum and the Sustainable Finance Initiative, and I think these are valuable domains that could have a symbiotic relationship with model training such that you can improve the responsiveness of models when it comes to these domains through training them better on data in these areas, but also utilizing the feedback that comes from those models to improve work in these domains, similar to how, for example, AI is being utilized for medical discovery or for protein discovery. Similarly, I believe you could utilize it in the energy environment space and hopefully unlock areas where there isn't too much human attention being put on, but these models could obviously scale and consider things that we might not consider in our own time. Yeah, it's a funny story where I got to know the founder, Adi Ansari, before I was interacting directly with Micro One, and I got to know him as a friend. And over time, I learned more and more about what Micro One does, what their needs are, and what their areas of application are. And it kind of became a natural trajectory to me working with them gradually, starting off with just getting to know Adi and the product more, and then expanding to research and looking at the training side of things, and ended up being a full-fledged relationship. Yeah, that's a great question. My very first AI interview in my life was with Micro One, and before that I had heard that these interviews exist. I had been hesitant as to whether or not I'd like to take AI interviews as opposed to talking to humans, especially considering what we had heard from beforehand about resume screening or things of that sort. And I ended up enjoying it much more than I thought. I was happily surprised by how detailed it was and how natural it felt. Of course, you can still tell that the person on the other side is most likely not going to be a human, but I was surprised that even by the point that I was interacting with it, which was months ago, it still felt relatively human-like, and it gave me hope that in the near future, it could entirely really replace human interviews with AI interviews. One thing I did like is that it geared it very well to my background and to my responses, more so than I had experienced necessarily in human interviews, where I felt it's much more script-driven, which is kind of surprising because you would assume that humans would be more adapted to adjusting to your responses. And maybe it's just my experience, but overall, I felt that it could take my response and really build upon it much more so than I would have expected. Essentially, we're working on improving the latest and greatest models that are developed by these top AI labs. And the way we go about it is being able to provide specialized context for training and managing that process such that the current state-of-the-art models don't end up being able to respond adequately at the level that we want to these questions. And the way I personally focus on it is obviously drawing from my research and my background. And I personally focus on being able to make these models better when it comes to both evaluating problems in the energy modeling and sustainable finance space, but also getting responses that are such that somebody who isn't necessarily well versed in these spaces could understand, and having the explain like I'm 5 version be accurate and reasonable. Additionally, on the research side, I work on improving the capability of the LLMs used within Micro One to judge and evaluate candidates. Yeah, so I typically pursue these things in parallel. I think one side can inform the other and vice versa. And so looking at the LLM as a judge side, it typically looks at the data that we have to evaluate how well these models are actually performing relative to an informed human who could go in and evaluate the responses of the candidate. But on the data side of things, I mostly look at the latest research that I do and my colleagues do, and translating that into something that I would expect, let's say, a early stage PhD student or a master's student who's engaged in research would be able to respond and evaluate these models against that and provide rubrics as to how those models should ideally go about evaluating their own responses, so that we can ideally get to an automated pipeline where you can have these models generating responses, evaluating it themselves with another model to make sure that they're responding properly, and being able to nudge them in the right direction, similar to how I would personally do if a junior PhD student came up to me and said, oh, I have questions about this space, can you help me understand if my work is good, how I can try to improve it, so on and so forth. Well, I'd say it's pretty clear that the impact thus far has already been very significant, and we expect it to be much more significant. Only time will tell what it'll exactly end up being like, but I'd be happy to share both what I think it would be with, obviously, the disclaimer that obviously I don't come from the future, so I don't know what's going to happen, and also that it's naturally influenced by my bias as to how I would like things to end up. I'm very passionate about education and being able to see how we can improve the educational experience for whether it be students at Stanford or students anywhere in the world. I've naturally been limited geographically as a human, but what excites me is that you can unleash the capability of people to teach beyond their geographic limitations, and that already happened to some extent with Coursera and similar products that end up teaching, providing educational courses to people around the world who only need an internet connection. But the incorporation of LLMs, broadly AI, and their cost effectiveness has led to it being much more customized. So even if you have like a high quality, highly paid tutor who is coming in to teach you, it's still not going to be as personalized as an LLM can be when it's looking at not only your chat history with them and the experience they've had with areas that you might be better in and areas you might struggle in, but also, assuming you opt into the option, looking at a much greater spectrum of your past experiences and your past search queries to respond to your inquiries and guide you in the right direction. I personally believe that right now, obviously, is an exciting time for AI applications in anything, education being only one of them. But I think that it's very exciting that the potential of the world is kind of being unlocked by LLMs. Like going all the way through history, you look at it and see, okay, we had a time when in the very distant past, like there was no like proper written communication. We didn't have paper. It was mostly oral transmission of information. From there was one revolution of it being actually stored beyond the lifespan of the individuals who had them. And then with the advent of the internet, that became much more readily available online to everyone. But it was still just a transformation from the physical content to something being able to be transmitted over the internet. With this recent advancement, we have more transferability of the actual context and understanding and customization to the end user. So if you look at, let's say, an energy paper that I'm composing, if you heard me explain it, or if you read it on paper, or if you read it online, it's still essentially the same information. And if you don't have context on it, it's going to be hard for you to access. But when it comes to these models, they can customize those explanations exactly to you. You're probably not going to be able to get somebody to come and spend hours to explain the whole field to you when it comes to a domain, but you can get these models to do that for you and get you up to speed, which is incredibly exciting because it unleashes people across the world in rural areas or in privileged areas or wherever there may be to access information on all domains. That's an interesting question. I'd say to a significant extent I do. I don't think that papers will go away entirely. I think they're a very valuable form of knowledge transmission, particularly because of the historical context of that happening and you being able to evaluate papers that are published now or in the future with what had come out in the past. But I do think that the medium with which we will access knowledge that is initially disseminated through papers is changing rapidly towards being able to search on these AI models and get responses generated and customized to your needs. As an example, in the past, when I wanted to learn about a new topic, my go-to approach would be, okay, let's go find papers on this topic, or if there's an author that I know and I want to read their latest and greatest work, I'd go and just check what they've been up to, what they've published, and start skimming through it. Naturally, over time, you gain more proficiency in doing this. You can quickly skim over it and find the parts that are more relevant to your interests and go in and focus on that. But these days, I'm not going to go and start Googling these things up to start, and I find it to be much more common that I end up on one of the most common LLMs and asking it about a particular domain, asking it to summarize these papers for me. And again, I think one very important aspect of it is that in many areas where I am by no means an expert, it enables me to understand more about those domains and much more quickly. And I think it gives people the confidence, whether it be in institutions like Stanford or in places that are very distant from Stanford who only have an internet connection, to go in and say, okay, I can go in and get this adjusted to the degree of detail that I want and delivered to me. So I do think that we're transitioning to a stage where there's going to be much more focus on being able to get curated content based off of the source data, which in this case would be academic papers, deliver to each and every individual who's interested in it. That's a very good question. The way I view it personally, and again, obviously there's only so much we can know at this point in history, and it's going to be interesting to look back in the future on this and see how accurate or inaccurate these thoughts might have been. But I personally believe that essentially a good chunk of teaching is going to be transitioned to LLMs and learning from them when it comes to at least the basics. I don't think the human element will ever go away simply because we're humans and we like to have human connection. But I think, let's assume there are so many websites that you can go to, whether it be Course Hero or similar websites where you go to try and find other people's review material and guidance on how you can proceed with improving your own learning of a topic. I think over time that is going to be adjusted more towards LLMs themselves, and particularly when it comes to tutoring and the part that is more hands-on, I think the LLMs are going to come in and have a much more significant role. We already see that happening with a lot of different online tools, from Khan Academy to other websites where this is already taking place. But I think that over time that's just going to be increased more and more, and it's going to become more commonly acceptable. Right now, I think when it comes to educational institutions, there's a lot of concern around, okay, how welcoming of these LLMs do we want to be? Will it lead to students learning better, or will it lead to them essentially outsourcing their work to these LLMs to do it for them and then delivering it, and leading to them not learning as well as they used to? And I think both sides are kind of in the middle right now. They don't know if it's actually improving their learning experience or if it's just a source to get answers quickly, leading to you not to go through the struggle yourself. I do, however, think that when it comes to the delivery of the content itself, we already had a solution to replicate that and scale it through online videos, through the availability of them, through all kinds of edX and Coursera and whatnot. But when it came to the more detailed and rigorous aspect of things of, okay, I've already heard it once, I've already seen it once, but now can I actually understand it properly hands-on? I think that is an aspect that we have not been able to solve as well up until now, and LLMs are kind of coming in and taking us through that very important last mile of getting to readily available and democratized education for all. I'd say it's both very exciting and energizing, but also humbling, and leads to thinking more and more about, okay, like, am I doing this in the best way possible, or should I be doing it somehow differently? You feel like there's a heavy degree of responsibility that comes with that. And I personally think it is something that we have to do. Like, many valuable things in our lives are going to be hard to do, and also things that you have to be very careful with. I personally view it as the opportunity to expand my teaching from, I've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to teach to over 1,000 students at Stanford through various courses. But I reflect on that, and I think this has been over multiple years, and there's only so much of that you can do throughout your lifetime. Whereas, and it's also going to be very geographically limited, and only to like those who can come to those courses, and naturally that's only a small subset of the entire human population. The idea that somebody sitting in a area where the only thing they might have is like a proper internet connection, and only maybe even spotty at times, can access almost the same degree of quality of responses that somebody who, let's say, is at Stanford and is attending the course can through these LLMs is incredibly exciting, especially because you come and see it happening in real life. So I see that the tools that I'm using are the same that some of my friends in other countries are using, and it gets me excited about the idea that, okay, you end up having this repository of information that is retained not only over time, but is also arguably going to end up being better than, and is going to be a much better form of information transfer to a lot of students than I could, because it's going to be customized to their prior questions as well. Oh boy, so 5 or 10 years is essentially a century in AI timescale. It's been less than 5 years since ChatGPT was publicly released, so who knows what things are going to look like. But I'm going to try to limit myself to the domains that I'm more focused on, as opposed to like going in and saying, okay, will AI end up taking over the world, or so on and so forth. And in doing so, I think that within 5 years, we will see the notion of AI tutors or AI educational learning companions, whatever it ends up being branded, is becoming much more commonplace than they are right now. We already see it being more accepted in educational institutions today than we did maybe only a year or two ago. And I think that trend will only continue precipitously and get us to a point where we have this be accepted as, okay, similar to how today it would be acceptable for a student to go and get a tutor and have them help them learn the content of the course. It'll become much more acceptable for them to have these AI tutors. And the good thing is that pretty much everyone can have them. They're much more cost efficient and they're much more readily available to anyone wherever they are. You don't have to be in the same location as the person. Obviously, Zoom already helped that a bit, but there's also the idea of contextualization and to some extent language barriers as well. And I think within 5 years, we'll get to that point where everybody's interacting with them. I think the 10-year vision is, I think education would be entirely revolutionized within the next 10 years through the implementation of AI if everything goes smoothly. And it would be such that looking back at a time where the main mode of transfer of knowledge is humans coming together in a room and being educated by a singular human or a group of teaching, okay, there's TAs and so on and so forth, but you get the gist of it, will become kind of like a notion of the past. I think similar to how going to the library to take out books seems like it's very fun to do, but it's not the only way we can do it right now. I remember vividly in my childhood when if I wanted to read a book, I'd go and put a hold for like number 17 in a long line of folks at the public library and hope that, okay, we'll get this book at some point, and not really being able to imagine that, okay, I'll have books everywhere readily available to me. And in a similar vein, I believe that we're going to get to a point where, okay, we have these courses offered at these particular times, these particular instructors, you have to go into a wait list to be able to access it. I don't think classes will go away entirely because, again, that human element is valuable for humans, I think, but it'll become much more of a more focused thing where people can learn the basics already through these AI tutors, and there might be more frontier knowledge applications where you want to go and work with the human experts in the world on a topic, as opposed to going in for the generalized initial understanding of a topic. Yeah, that is a question I've actually thought about over the past months, and I do believe that there will be changes to how that is accounted for. I don't think, again, citation influence will go away entirely, but I do think that citation count is an imperfect measure of impact for any academic contribution. It might be the case that your paper is cited because they want to say your work is not complete and we want to complete it beyond that, whereas being asked a query about something having your work be a contributor to the response is a much more meaningful measure of it, in my opinion. I don't know what the exact metric should end up looking like, but I think something like training influence or the degree of times that your work has contributed to responses of the model to people who are asking questions about it should be an additional metric that is considered in the impact and value of work. Now, I think in the academic world, it might be the case that the citation count, and obviously there are other metrics that are used right now in academia, will certainly persist. But I think when it comes to a broader span of work, whether it be blog posts or articles, alongside academic work, the idea of how commonly is it used is going to become more valuable than it is right now when it comes to evaluating, okay, how impactful has your work been and how broad a reach has it had? This obviously lends itself to some complicated questions around copyright and legal rights of work, and obviously I'm no expert in those spaces, so I'm not going to delve into them, but you can see I'm saying delve. I feel like I'm already impacted by AI models and focusing on delve, but to be fair, I've been using delve for from long before AI models came around, so maybe I'm an AI model myself. And I would say that looking at those metrics and being able to evaluate them well, I think is a very interesting intellectual question as to how do we define the contributions of any source of knowledge or any work to AI models, both in the training stage and also inference. Absolutely. I personally think that for sure there are those opportunities, and I think they should be pursued both directly and even indirectly if you want to start off that way. As I mentioned, I personally did not start off by going directly into the space, but another lucky coincidence and the long list of lucky coincidences I've had in my life has been to get to know Ali and then learn more about Micro One and their work and kind of get involved through there. I think both on the research side, for all researchers, I believe it's a great opportunity to collaborate with companies such as Micro One that are focused on improving these models and making them readily available to end users across the world. But also when it comes to the training side, I'd say, I think first off, it's very important to understand the underlying models. Unfortunately, AI can't come in and help you gain that better understanding entirely until you've actually grasped it yourself. And then beyond that, I'd say quality over quantity is always important. There's a lot of data in the world, and it was already being rapidly generated through the advent of the internet, and it's just becoming more and more exponential. There's so much AI slop, or whatever they want to call it, of AI-generated content sitting around, and the end goal is to not provide that as part of our efforts, but to focus on the exact opposite of that and being, okay, what would it be that these models can not only not properly generate themselves, but would not actually think about themselves to generate, and provide that to these models so they can learn from it. And my recommendation would be, yeah, focus on learning the fundamentals, having a good grasp and understanding of it such that you could teach it to someone else, going from there to focusing on quality over quantity. And last but not least, I'd say a focus on what do you actually want to contribute. There's so many different things you could contribute, but looking at your own preferences and your own priorities, looking at your own ethical questions around, okay, how do we think these models should be geared to reply, and what domains would it be most valuable for them to reply? Because despite how large they get, there's still going to be a finite limit on the size of these models and the amount of data that is going to meaningfully influence their decision making and response generation. And thinking, for example, in my case, I personally believe that being able to provide unbiased, grounded facts when it comes to the spaces of energy and the risks and the advantages of all kinds of different technologies to the general public is incredibly important, particularly in this time when energy consumption and demand is skyrocketing with data centers and industrialization and expanding on industrial production. I think it's incredibly important for people to be clear on, let's say, the risks and the benefits of nuclear in the current age, for example, as small modular reactions, or, for example, the reliability of firm or unfirm resources, let's say renewable energy, and considering that in the decision-making of everyday individuals as to how they want to prioritize different sources. And so obviously that's my area of focus, but I'd say you certainly want to be able to focus on whatever your domain of expertise is and provide those unbiased data points for the models to be able to learn from. So it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope to see you guys at Micro One sometime soon. See you around.